Um, So good afternoon. I'm Joan Benz, the program coordinator, and I'd like to introduce Carol Karp, our executive director, for a program update. Again, please mute your microphones and welcome.
Welcome, everyone. I'm Carol Karp, the Executive Director of Sharp Again. At Sharp Again, our mission is to educate and empower people to take charge of their cognitive health. We do this in many ways through webinars like this one, in-person presentations, articles, resources, and a website filled with valuable information. But one of the most powerful ways we support brain health is through our small group coaching program. This program provides live education and support led by a certified health coach. Groups meet on Zoom once a week for 6 weeks,
Honey, can you stop?
focusing on
Please.
4 key lifestyle areas that we know have a major impact on cognition: nutrition, sleep, exercise, and stress. The full cost of this program is over $450, but thanks to the generosity of our donors, we're able to offer it for just $99. Our next session starts Wednesday, March 20th at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time, and registration is open now. If you've started noticing memory lapses, or if you simply want to learn how to keep your brain sharp, this is a great place to start. To learn more, just email us at info@sharpagain.org. We also have some exciting upcoming webinars. Our next webinar is next week, Thursday, February 26th at noon, Unlocking Brain Health, Sharp Again's Roadmap to a Sharper Mind. We'll take a deep dive into our updated roadmap and show you how to use it to boost brain health, sharpen focus, and strengthen your mind for years to come. Then on Wednesday, March 19th at noon, Dr. Penelope McDonald joins us for the Sugar in Your Diet, Friend or Foe for Brain Health. We'll explore how natural sugars provide essential nutrients while processed sugars can harm your health, and most importantly, how to nourish your brain the right way. After today's webinar, you'll receive an email with all these program details, a recording link to this program, and any resources mentioned in this presentation. If you have any questions during the webinar, please type them in the chat box and we'll answer them during the Q&A at the end of the presentation. Before we begin, a quick note. The information shared today is for educational purposes only and is not medical advice. Please consult a licensed medical practitioner for any health concerns. And now it gives me great pleasure to introduce our guest speaker, Dr. Richard Carlton. Dr. Carlton is an integrative psychiatrist and pioneer in the rational use of nutrition-based treatment approaches when treating mental issues such as depression, anxiety, ADHD, or physical problems such as cognitive impairment, dementia, PMS, migraines, and IBS. He practices in Port Washington, New York, and is a member of the Sharp Again Medical Advisory Board. We're so pleased to welcome him here today. Dr. Carlton.
Hi, everyone. Pleasure to talk to you. Can I get my first slide? Okay, so there's an underlying premise to today's talk. For the 50 years or so I've been in practice, I've been exploring a very simple idea. Whatever the condition is there food that might be triggering it? And is there a food or supplement that might cure or at least relieve and alleviate the symptoms? I started taking that approach in 1975. And it's been very challenging, very productive, very exciting. To help to make this clear for you, I want to explain 2 things. There's a condition called West syndrome, like the direction west. It was the name of a neonatologist in the 1950s or 60s. And he was treating little neonates with seizures all day long, refractory seizures, and these kids died usually in 2 or 3 days. If they survived, they'd be retarded. You'll see in a minute why I'm talking about, and I now talk on Alzheimer's, why I'm talking about neonates. So Dr. West was treating one of these little children, it was a little girl, and she spiked the fever, got pneumonia, stopped eating. They gave her an IV to feed her. The seizures stopped. Grand mal just stopped. When the fever resolved with antibiotics, they took the IV out and she started seizing again. So Dr. West said to himself, there must be something in the IV fluid that was being delivered that turned the seizures off. So one by one, he gave the little girl whatever was in the IV fluid. Glucose, that didn't do it. Saline, that didn't do it. Then there were vitamins in the fluid. So I gave vitamin B1, didn't do anything. Vitamin B2, nope. Vitamin B3, nope. Vitamin B6, the seizures stopped. And the little girl had normal levels of vitamin B6 in the bloodstream. She was not deficient in vitamin B6. But for some reason that he didn't understand, vitamin B6, pyridoxine, turned off these grand mal seizures. Well, it was discovered over the course of the next 20 years that these kids have a deficient enzyme in the brain, enzyme glutamic acid decarboxylase, GAD. B6 catalyzes that enzyme. If that enzyme is floppy and sloppy, doesn't have enough B6, it can't make GABA, the inhibitory neurotransmitter, and they'll have seizures. All of the seizure medications are based on acting on GABA. So they call it West syndrome in honor of Dr. West. So when a physician who doesn't believe in nutrition tells you, oh, the diet provides you all the nutrients that you need, taking extra nutrients doesn't do a thing for you. If that doctor were a neonatologist and didn't give extra B6 to his children with refractory neonatal seizures, he'd be sued and he'd lose the lawsuit really badly. So there's something called biologic individuality. Some people have a much higher requirement for the vitamins and amino acids and fatty acids. Okay, now the other thing I'm talking about here is trigger foods. Very quickly, in the 80s, I had a 27-year-old young woman refer to me. Brief story, profoundly depressed, couldn't get out of bed till 3 in the afternoon, crying every day, brain fog, not working. Daddy's wealthy, could afford to have an apartment for her in the city, but she wanted to work. Her therapist referred her to me. I took her off a chocolate. It completely cleared up. Within 6 months, she was enrolled at Hunter College, became a clinical psychologist. A year later, she was married. A year later, I got a card in the mail from the first baby. A year later, the second baby. All I did was take her off a chocolate. So foods can have a profound effect on the brain, and they're doing it through something called a lectin, L-E-C-T-I-N. L-E-C-T-I-N. We'll come back to that later. Next slide, please, Joan. So the outline of today's talk, we're going to look at some of the insults that we see in the dementia brain. Then we're going to look at how nutrients and herbs can theoretically address those brain insults. Then we'll show some clinical examples showing that this works, that we can get robust clinical improvement in cognition in people with really end-stage dementia. So next slide. But before we go there, I want to talk about something really important for you. You need to look if there might be medications causing the memory problems. This is called iatrogenic illness. Iatro refers to physician. And these are commonplace. Artificial intelligence can help you figure out if the meds you're taking or your loved one is taking might be a problem. I like to use Gemini. It's free, gemini.google.com. You type in a query such as this: which of these medications, enter the brand name or generic name, might have the side effect of interfering with memory and or cognition. So I did this 6 weeks ago, 8 weeks ago, with a patient of mine who's a colleague involved in really heavy-duty neurofeedback, QEEGs. This guy's a whiz, but he was really losing his memory. And I've been trying for a year to get him to lose weight. I'll be talking about a weight loss program later. We got him down 40 pounds, a new belt, and he's still very fuzzy. He has trouble getting on with me on a Zoom session. So 2 months ago, I said, let's look at the medications that you're taking. And so I put in a Gemini search. One of the things he's taking is acyclovir, which stops the genital herpes that he has on his buttocks. Turns out that can interfere with cognition. And I had him go off it. And cognition is sharply improving. He sounds like his old self. Okay, next slide. The second thing you really need to be aware of is if there's a sudden and sharp decline in the mental status, there's 3 things to look at. The first is infection, infection, infection. It's typically a urinary tract infection, UTI, can be pneumonia, inflammation of the heart valve lining, endocarditis. In the elderly, often there'll be no cough, no fever with the pneumonia. They're just sick. And what happens is they start hallucinating. Or if they're already hallucinating, as my late wife was hallucinating, and they get an infection, the hallucinations take a really nasty turn. When my wife, with her advanced Parkinson's, had her normal everyday hallucinations, she would say, oh, there's the crane outside the window. He's putting in a hot tub at her neighbors across the street. There's no crane outside, but that's what she saw. But when she had a UTI, the way I knew it was all of a sudden, oh, there's 50 people in the room. There's a dog vomiting on the bed. There's a woman hanging from the ceiling fan. When I got nightmarish, I call her doctor and we say, yep, it's infection, time for the antibiotic. So always be aware of infection if a sudden worsening of the mental status. Cardiac arrhythmias can also cause this kind of a worsening. And you should really have a cardia device. I don't get any benefit from recommending it. This can pick up the arrhythmias like atrial fib. Atrial fibrillation did that with me when I first had atrial fib. And stroke, of course, not all strokes are catastrophic. Sometimes they're just small strokes, and you can get a big change in mental status. Next slide. Now, I want you to do your best to visualize how brain metabolism is demolished in Alzheimer's. On the left, you see a normal SPECT scan of the blood flow in a normal brain. You're looking at the base of the brain. Picture a garage mechanic lying on one of those dollies, going into the car and looking at the engine block. You're looking at the base of the brain, and this is blood flow on the left in the normal brain. On the right is a typical Alzheimer's brain. You see all those gaps? The brain material is not missing. The brain is there. The blood flow is gone or diminishing. And the reason the blood flow is diminishing is the metabolism is drying up, being choked off. The brain cells are just not making energy and not functioning well. Next slide. So let's talk about some of the brain insults. One is, as we saw on the slide before, blood flow to the key regions of the brain has shut down. Insult number 2, even if there's adequate blood flow to the neurons, the cellular factories for extracting energy from food are broken down. Insult number 3, it would be neuroinflammation. That's inflammation of the neurons resulting from oxygen-free radicals and also from the reaction to beta amyloid. That's the protein you hear about that's abnormal in Alzheimer patients. Next slide. So what can we do about it with nutrients? Well, if blood flow is blocked, we can use herbs that increase brain blood flow, like ginkgo. If the energy factories in the neurons are broken down, we can use nutrients that get the cell's energy factories humming again. You'll see these in a few minutes. If there are free radicals setting the brain on fire, neuroinflammation, we can use herbs and nutrients that can quench, that is, put out the fire of the free radicals that are generated simply from using oxygen. I want to tell you something really important. If you take pen and paper, write this down. Your loved ones who are dealing with cognitive loss, or if it's you yourself, do not take multivitamins and multiminerals that have zinc or copper. Do not take zinc or copper. Because when there's amyloid in the Alzheimer brain, you don't necessarily have Alzheimer's disease. It's only when there's relatively high amounts of zinc and or copper present in the brain. That's when the beta amyloid starts to set the brain on fire. It's not a real fire, but you can see it on a PET scan that there's tremendous neuroinflammation throughout the brain. Low zinc, low copper, no inflammation, no Alzheimer's symptoms. Normal levels of zinc and copper, you get neuroinflammation and you get Alzheimer's symptoms. So, word to the wise, make sure you get a multi that doesn't have zinc and copper. Next slide. Well, what about the conventional medications like the donepezil, ribostigmine, galantamine? They don't do very much. I have seen them maybe increase some word recall, word finding, but they don't slow down the degeneration and the deterioration rapidly enough to make a clinical difference for your loved ones. When I was putting together a slideshow for the Amen clinics, it suddenly occurred to me, these medications, what they're doing is they're inhibiting an enzyme that breaks down acetylcholine. The scavenging acetylcholine, the neurotransmitter, so you have more to drive memory. But you're going to see the metabolism is really deteriorated. They're not making acetylcholine in the first place. So if you're not making enough acetylcholine, then these meds are not going to do very much. Next slide. So here was my first case. This is around 1980. Remember, I'm always looking to see where nutrients, foods can make a difference in no matter what the condition is. So a pediatrician colleague calls me up and says the grandfather of one of his little patients is an Israeli dentist, forced to retire because he was filling the wrong teeth. He was a concentration camp survivor, as was his wife. And they were here visiting the family, and the man has very advanced dementia. So, oh, by the way, he says they have 3 weeks before they're going back to Israel, see if there's anything you can do. So the gentleman comes in nicely dressed, speaking only Polish, and the only thing he says in Polish is the number 10, whatever that word is. He's smiling, saying 10, 10, 10 for a whole hour. All this guy says is 10. He's incontinent, doesn't know his name, doesn't know his wife's name, doesn't know his son's name, his grandchildren's name. Pretty far gone. I gave him intramuscular injections of the B complex. I don't normally give B complex injections, nor normally oral will suffice. But I reasoned that he probably had malabsorption from all those years in the concentration camp, and what have I got to lose? Comes back a week later, he's learned his name, he's learned his wife's name, and he's learned his son's name. Give him another injection. Comes back a week later, he knows his grandchildren's name. He's starting to go to the bathroom. He can't find the light switch, so he poops himself, but he has the idea of going to the bathroom. They show him where the light switch is. He's now continent. The daughter-in-law tells me something really fascinating. Pre-morbidly, that's before he was sick, he loved to flirt with her in a very nice way. It was a lot of fun. He would give her a little pinch on the butt. And she, oh, Dad, you're such a, you. I think that was a lovely thing that they did. It wasn't lascivious. It was fun. He's doing it again. He's getting his personality back. They go back to Israel and they give them boxes of the vials of the B complex and a letter to the geriatrician. Please make sure that he gets this once a month. He does really well for about half a year. Then the son calls me up and says he's demented again, completely demented, completely incontinent. Well, is he still getting the vitamins, the injections? Oh, by the way, the wife all along was giving him oral vitamins. So it's not a question of a deficiency. He was getting oral vitamins all along, and she continued giving him the oral vitamins. I said, find out if he's still getting the injection. son calls me back and says his mom says, no, there was a misunderstanding. The doctor thought he was doing well, didn't need the injections anymore. I said, that doesn't make any sense. This has to be continued. He's coming alive. So they get him back on the injections monthly, and everything's good for about 6 months. And then he's demented again, completely incontinent. And here's what really happened. The wife, also a concentration camp survivor, was a very nasty person. The son explained to me. His mom was very nasty. She didn't like it when he was back to his pre-morbid self because he would argue with her. She was very pushy, very controlling, and he would argue with her as he always had. She noticed that when he got the vitamin injections, he became challenging to her. She didn't like it, so she stopped the injections. And she said to the son, you're in the US, I'm in Israel, I'm not going to give him the injections anymore. There's nothing you can do about it. And he was dead 6 months later. Typical Alzheimer's death, pneumonia, whatever it was. Holy moly. Can nutrients help an Alzheimer's brain? Yes. Okay. So I'm a psychiatrist. People don't bring Alzheimer patients to a psychiatrist very often. They go to a neurologist, geriatrician. So I was looking for more cases. Well, fast forward, it's like 20 years later, 2011, 2012, the New York Academy of Sciences puts out a bulletin. There's going to be a conference on Alzheimer's as type 3 diabetes. Type 3 diabetes? What's that? So I went to the conference, the weekend symposium. What they were finding is that in the Alzheimer's brain, the insulin receptor doesn't work, so you can't get glucose into the cells. The receptor opens up a gate that lets glucose in. If the gate is closed, because insulin isn't working, glucose can't get into the neurons, and neurons basically perish. They don't make energy, they don't make acetylcholine. If you remember that slide from before. So I walked out of that lecture saying, wow, I can translate this. I know what to do. Just give ketones, give coconut oil to make ketones, and that will give the brain the chemicals that it needs to drive the metabolism. You can't get glucose in, but you can't get ketones in as acetate. Next slide. So the green arrow on the top pointed to acetoacetate. That's the acetate that ketone, coconut oil ketone, it's a fatty acid, will break down to and will drive the number 2, the tricarboxylic acid cycle. It's the Krebs cycle. And when the Krebs cycle is working, over on the left you see a big green arrow. It makes ATP, adenosine triphosphate. That's our energy that we use for every function of the body. We store energy. Normally, glucose would come near the bottom of this circle, the Krebs cycle, but glucose can't get in. So, we animals evolved, all of us animals evolved, that if we're starving, like in winter when there's very little food and you can break down your fat and live off of your fat, the fat on the land. And the fat will break down to acetoacetate and give you energy to drive the Krebs cycle and make ATP, and you don't die. Okay, so now I can't wait for an Alzheimer patient to be referred to me because I'm going to use ketones through coconut oil. Next slide. I was happy but sad to see that a Dr. Mary Newport wrote a book in the interim in which she gave her demented husband coconut oil. And I want to explain this slide to you. If I ask you to draw a clock, as you see, is always done in a psychological assessment of a cognitive decline, there's so many things involved in drawing a clock. You have to draw a circle. You have to put the numbers on. You have to show the minute hand and the hour hand and say, make it 10 after 10. that's 50,000 neurons involved in that in 37 different parts of the brain. It's a very complex thing to do, which is why it's an important test. On the left is Steve's clock at baseline. It's some gobbledygook nonsense. That's severe dementia. 2 weeks later on coconut oil, 2 weeks, look how good that clock is. There's still a lot of pathology, but he drew a circle and he's showing multiple examples of the minute hand and the hour hand, but he's got the concept of numbers, and the numbers don't go all the way around, but he's putting numbers on it. And there was that correlated with a very big clinical improvement. Up to that point, well, pre-morbid, he loved to take machines apart and put them back together. He just loved to do that, like a lawnmower. Now, when he was before the coconut oil, he would take the lawnmower apart and have no idea how to put it together again, or lose interest. When he was on the coconut oil, he could take things apart and put them back together again. So now I'm really, really determined. Boy, if I can only get an Alzheimer's patient in my practice, let's see what we could do. Next slide. In the interim, 10, 15, 20 years after that Israeli dentist, I had learned about coconut oil, the essential nutrients, EPA, bacopa, skullcap, curcumin, antioxidants like luteolin and quercetin. If you ask for the slideshow or some of these slides, you'll get this. I know it's a lot to write down. I'm going through it quickly. Luteolin is really important for putting out that fire and the neuroinflammation. Quercetin, these are polyphenols. When my asthma was really starting to bother me before my allergist put me on inhalable steroids 30 years ago, 40 years ago. But before that, I went to the health food store and I said, John, my asthma's getting worse. I'm short of breath. He gave me a bottle of quercetin. What's quercetin? It's in apples. It's a polyphenol. It's in onions. My asthma got a whole lot better. I could walk around without being short of breath. So these are very potent herbs, and they're really helpful to the Alzheimer's brain. You see ginkgo biloba and acetylcarnitine, which is the mitochondria cooking. We'll talk in a little bit about medical cannabis and the mind diet. But next slide. Second case, physician who doesn't even know his own name. Next slide. You're not going to be able to read this, but let me just give you the summary here. This guy in 2007 is an MD running a clinic, dances tango. He's from Argentina, has a lovely wife. He's writing chapters and books on regulation of monoamine neurotransmitters. This is a brainy guy, lively, wonderful guy. Has a first stroke and a second stroke. And after the third stroke, he can't walk. He can't swallow. They have a peg tube into his stomach to feed him that way. And when I meet him, he's 6 months with this peg tube. That's the only way he's getting food into him. If you put anything in his mouth, he knows he's going to choke on it. He'll fight you off to not put anything in his mouth. I told the wife, I think I can help him with coconut oil and things like that. So I go to their house and meet him. He's untestable. There's no MMSE or other thing a test you could do. He's semi-superous with his chin like that in his chest. Can't draw a clock. He just looked at the pen, didn't even take it from me. No comprehension. He was a physician, doesn't know his wife's name, doesn't know he was born and raised in Argentina. When I asked him, what's your name? He says, if I knew that, I could get out. Wow. Next slide. I asked the wife to start some of the nutrients one at a time. She didn't. She started them all at once. I know you're not going to be able to read this, but I'll just summarize this for you quickly. His level of functioning, GAF, general activity of functioning, is down around 7% from 100% within 3 years. The second dot is when we start the coconut oil and acetylcholine arginate, CDP-choline. Adding these things one by one, he learns his name, he learns his wife's name, he starts being able to get out of the wheelchair by himself. She can take him to restaurants. He can cut his own food. She takes him to Radio City Music Hall. He laughs appropriately at the wonderful things going on. He goes up and down the stairs with assistance, partially regains urinary and fecal continence, partially, goes to the bathroom, sits down on the toilet with his pants still up. So the wife comes in, takes his pants down. He's holding the magazine upside down on the toilet. But he has the idea. It was before, he was just in the diapers. Hospice is canceled. They no longer need hospice. Wife sends me a letter. Thank you for giving my husband back to me. All of a sudden, a year or so into this wonderful recovery, he plunges back to a very much lower level of functioning. He stopped taking the coconut oil. We guess it tasted too rich for him. He wouldn't eat anything that she could disguise it in. I found for him a coconut oil that didn't have that rich coconutty taste, which some people don't like. She snuck it in the food. He gained a lot of ground. And then I found out pantothenic acid, the B vitamin, could be helpful. That's when he really starts to take off. I want to tell you two things. There's a Christmas party. He's standing up. He's walking around. He's talking to old friends. He's understanding conversation. He's with it. One of the joys of my life is to see this man who had been wheelchair bound like that, standing up, eating a meal, talking to friends, and enjoying himself. It's his birthday. It's his wife's birthday. The aide rather, says to him, "What did you get your wife for her birthday?" He doesn't remember it's her birthday. He's still demented. He looks very unhappy. The aide taunts him again. "Why did you get your wife for her birthday?" The aide walks out and the wife says to him, "Darling, it's okay that you didn't get me anything for my birthday. I didn't remember. You've given me a lot over the years." He said, "I gave you love." "Yes, you did, sweetheart." Now, I want to start to wrap this up by telling you an amazing thing happened. Nothing that I did. He kept getting pneumonia, bronchopneumonia. They kept giving him antibiotics, and he'd get Clostridium difficile infection of the intestines with bloody diarrhea. At one point, the wife arranged for a colon fecal transplant. You can take fecal material from a healthy person and have it grown up in a lab and ingested by the patient. He got so cognitively advanced on that, he was having a normal conversation with a neurologist. He himself, I wasn't there, but the wife said he couldn't believe himself how fluid his brain was. Just yesterday, I saw something in a scientific blog that the intestinal flora of the biome, you always hear about the gut-brain axis, that gut flora can change the glucose molecules that attach to proteins on the surface of brain cells. They can completely rewire the brain. So until yesterday, I didn't understand why that fecal transplant could give him, as good as my approach was, that gave him like 50 times better. What the heck happened? It changed the flora. He got different carbohydrates, sugars, like mannose, whatever, latching onto neurons. It improved things. So folks, you're hearing it here first. Hot lead, fecal transplant. Think about it. Okay, next one or two slides. You got to unbooby trap the house, so start to gain more freedom. Ask the doctor if there's any contraindications. For example, turmeric, which is a wonderful anti-inflammatory that I use all the time on my Alzheimer's patients, my arthritis patients, my psychiatric patients. Turmeric will interfere with blood thinners like Eliquis, and you don't want to have a bleed because you gave turmeric. So ask the doctor if they have any objections. Next slide. Obesity will really ramp up brain shrinkage and neuroinflammation. I have some herbs that I use that we call herbal Ozempic. If you contact me, I'll be glad to, if you live in New York State, I'll be glad to work with you, and I take Medicare. I can work with this obesity to people lose 40, 60 pounds. Medical cannabis is wonderful for the agitation of Alzheimer's. There is no reason why your loved one has to suffer in that sundowning, screaming and kicking and fighting. They're using it in nursing homes across the country, not a lot of them, but some of them. And the patients, instead of screaming and being paranoid and horrified, they're mellow, they're talkative, they're eating, their appetite comes back. You know, it's a stimulant for the appetite, of course. I can prescribe medical cannabis. So something you can consider, and I'm using on one of my cognitively impaired patients, and it really works. I recently saw something about near infrared light being helpful. It makes sense. Next slide. Back to my original hypothesis. The answer is yes, there are many conditions that respond well to diet changes and nutrients. Next slide. If you're interested in, if you've tried everything else and you're interested in trying the infrared light approach, I have a colleague who is doing that and has had great success bringing Alzheimer's patients to a much higher level of functioning. Contact me, I'll be glad to make the introductions and explain it to you. And so now we're going to open this up to questions.
You can unmute your microphone if you have a question or put them in the chat box. Will you share slides so we can take these med lists home to invest to? Yes, we can share the slide deck. I'll include that with my recap tomorrow.
I don't take anything besides Medicare, no.
Joan, there was also a question from Ann Hyatt about, should we all be taking coconut oil like a daily vitamin? If
I don't
so,
think
what format?
I don't think we all need it. It can give diarrhea. I've had patients who got diarrhea in just a teaspoon of coconut oil. If you're cognitively sound, I don't think you need it. But if you're starting to fade, sure, take it. And you can add it to food. Stews, soups, things like that. At room temperature, it's kind of a little bit solid and waxy. So people like to mix it into warmer food.
Okay, another question we have is, can you share foods that you find copper in?
Foods with copper? You can look that up on Google, on special artificial intelligence. Foods rich in copper. I believe that nuts have a lot of it. I'm not sure. I don't think the normal daily amount of copper we get in the diet and zinc we get in the diet is a problem. It's the supplements that will have like 16 milligrams of zinc or 2 milligrams of copper all at once in one big shot. I think that's the problem.
Another question is, can you help Parkinson's patients with nutrients and herbs?
Yes, this helps Parkinson's patients. I know from experience. And this is why you have to unbooby trap the house. I was treating a woman with Parkinson's. She could not get out of the wheelchair. Took 2 people to get her out of the wheelchair and walk her around. I put her on coconut oil. She became so mobile that the aide and the family started bringing her to all her medical appointments without the wheelchair. She's walking around. I mean, slow, but she's walking. She goes into heart failure and dies. Well, heart failure, they get her out of the heart failure, but she got a urinary tract infection while she's in the hospital and dies from it. That's when I realized, I said to myself, Richard, you got to be a physician. You have to look at the whole person. I didn't know that she was prone to congestive heart failure. And I didn't know that they were going to have her walk to all these appointments instead of being pushed in a wheelchair. She couldn't tolerate that big push in physical activity. It decompensated her heart. So you have to look at the whole person. So yes, it will help Parkinson's.
Okay, Kathleen asked, Are there anti-inflammatory supplements that you have found helpful with fatigue related to long COVID?
Turmeric. The active ingredient of it is called curcumin, curcumin. I like nano curcumin, which is made by One Planet Nutrition, 500 milligrams. You can buy that on Amazon. And I tried it on about 25 patients with COVID. Some of them were acute, some of them were long haul. Every stage of the illness, it was tremendously helpful. There's some others too that help, but that's the main one.
Dawn asked, how much coconut oil each day, and is MCT oil just as good?
I'm not sure about the question. How much?
How much coconut oil, and also is MCT oil just as good?
MCT means medium chain triglyceride. They're pretty much the same function. They'll make ketone bodies. I start my patients on just a quarter of a teaspoon of coconut oil because you can really get diarrhea. And if they're ambulatory, they don't want to get sudden evacuation. So quarter teaspoon, and I build up slowly as they tolerate it to 2 tablespoons a day. But start slow.
Joan, I think I hit all the questions. Is there anything else that I might have missed?
I think you did. There are a couple of fans of near infrared light there.
I saw somebody just asked about the luteolin. It's so important. The brain has its own kind of white blood cells. Just like the blood has white blood cells, they're a different kind of white blood cells. They look very different. They're called glial cells, Glial. And these glial cells in the brain start reacting to the beta amyloid and the neurofibrillary tangles, the plaques, and they inflame. They send out inflammatory mediators like histamine, tumor necrosis factor alpha, and that perpetuates the inflammation in a vicious cycle. Luteolin shuts down and quiets down those glial cells. So does CBD, cannabidiol, the non-psychoactive part of cannabis and hemp. So the 2 ways to quiet down the inflammation are luteolin and CBD. It's just remarkable how well it can quench those fires. Yes, I do recommend luteolin and quercetin for wellness. I take quercetin every day. I don't take luteolin, but if there's any cognitive loss, yes, start taking it. You'll find on Amazon, just type in, you'll find a lot of products that have it. So taking breaks with something, I don't recommend taking breaks with something with the supplements. I don't like to see people lose ground. There's just, I don't see any point in having them lose ground. No.
Karen wants to know about clean sources of CBD.
Say it again.
Karen asked, do you know clean sources of CBD?
Clean, yeah, sure. A very good company is called Plus, Plus CBD. You could find them on the web, not on Amazon. Amazon is not allowed to sell CBD. They sell hemp seed oil. That's not the same thing. CBD, go to Plus, Plus CBD. Look for their products that don't have THC in them. There's just CBD. You can trust that company. They have very high quality. The amount of coconut oil, start with 1/4 teaspoon. Work it up gradually to half, 3/4, a whole, 1 1/2, and then up to 2 tablespoons per day. I haven't gone higher than 2 tablespoons. I suppose one could if there's no diarrhea. The overview here is it's not a cure. The coconut oil and the supplements that you see me talk about, it didn't cure any cases, but what a phenomenal recovery and improvement you can bring about. That's pretty good. So it answers the question, can nutrients make a difference in psychiatric disease, neurological disease, medical conditions? Yes, it can. There's a question. Near infrared. Well, quick thing about infrared. I have a device. I find it helpful for musculoskeletal pain. When I first got it, it didn't make any sense to me because the literature said infrared spectrum gets absorbed through the skin. I thought, that's nonsense. It can't go through the skin. But I read a book on the subject because all these colleagues were saying it's helpful. I'll give the respect of reading a book. And it said it increases activity of mitochondria in the red blood cells going through the capillaries in the skin. Then I thought about it. Remember when you were a kid, you take in a dark room, you take a flashlight, shine it through your palm, your web of your finger, and you turn red there. Of course, light goes through the skin. You can see the light of the flashlight. It's red coming through the skin. So yes, it goes through and can be absorbed and has effects on neuronal activity. And I have a colleague in Manhattan who's using infrared, transcranial, near infrared devices on the skull. A little bit expensive to buy, but I can, if you contact me, I can get you in touch with them. Oh, someone says it was a cardiologist who recommended the infrared for them. Terrific. That's great. Yay.
So Andrea asked, is there an issue with coconut oil and high cholesterol?
It doesn't mess with cholesterol. Mary Newport, her book is called Alzheimer's Disease, What If There's a Cure? And she has a whole chapter dedicated to the subject that coconut oil does not cause a bad profile of cholesterol or triglycerides. It's an excellent question. That's good thinking to wonder about it. But it doesn't mess it up. And even if it did, it's worthwhile.
Dawn Jordan asked, how could she find a practitioner who does fecal transplants?
Good question. I would Google it. You know, every major hospital, like in New York, NYU Langone, Cornell, Columbia, if you look on their faculty, you go into gastroenterology as a specialty and noodle around in those specialists, and maybe you find somebody who does fecal transplants. And if you just can't find anybody, call the secretary for that department. Just go to the switchboard and ask the operator to put you in contact with the administrator or secretary for the Department of Gastroenterology and ask her or him if they know of anybody who does fecal transplants. Because that's usually where it's done, is at the academic centers. It was staggering how well that improved him. Unfortunately, he kept getting these infections. He wouldn't exercise. We could not get him to get in the treadmill. So he get pneumonia, and then they give him antibiotics, and he got Clostridium difficile, and that's what killed him, Clostridium difficile.
I think that we seem to have no more questions, although we're getting lots of thank yous to you, Dr. Carlton, for an incredible presentation. I really appreciate your time that you spent with us today.
My great pleasure. I hope this was helpful for you. Bye.
Hi, Dr. Carlton. Thank you so much.
Pleasure. Okay. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye. I'm going to stop the recording.